This chapter digs into processes. Quality management is really about fixing processes. So, this seemingly elementary chapter is really quite important. Quoting the text, a process is a collection of tasks, steps, or activities that are performed, usually in a specific order, and result in an end product, such as a tangible good or the provision of a service. And you can think of your organization as one big process, and it consists of many sub processes. Same goes for your job. That is, your job is a bunch of processes. Generally, we just do our work without really recognizing that it means that we're executing a bunch of processes. The same can be said of the entire organization. So, the superordinate idea of this chapter is that fixing a process is key to fixing quality. In other words, to fix the quality of outputs, meaning from the process, you need to fix the underlying processes that create the outputs. So, to be a quality improver, you need to be a process fixer. The text presents four layers of a process. And number one is steps. A process is a series of steps. And then a standard operating procedure, an SOP, is a documented step by step set of instructions that outlines how to perform a process. Where possible, an SOP includes photos and or diagrams for precision. So SOPs ensure consistency, efficiency, and safety, thus reducing defects. Number two is processing time. It's important to measure both the average and variability of the time needed to complete a process. And real-time observation, such as watching the process with a stopwatch, is often the best way to understand true processing time. And this can also help identify the key drivers of time that might need to be addressed to improve the process. And number three is interdependencies. Almost all processes are interlinked. At a minimum, all processes support the organization. Additionally, the outputs of one process typically become the inputs or perhaps a resource of another process. So fixing one process will likely involve understanding other processes. And then number four is resources and assignments. Processes require resources such as labor, equipment, data, money, technology, and so forth. To fix a process, you have to understand who controls the resources, such as who approves and pays for them. So if we put all of these ideas together, fixing one isolated process will have a minimal overall impact on the organization unless you understand the effects of the changes on other processes. The text then presents five components of a process. First, inputs enter a process. So for products, these are more so raw materials, such as ingredients for a pizza. For services, the inputs often include people, such as someone requesting training, like you. Understanding the inputs, including requirements, costs, and prior processes, is critical to begin to fix a process. Next, outputs are produced by a process. For products, these are physical goods, like a pizza. For services, these are often intangible, though there can be a physical side, such as new oil in your car or maybe a haircut. And customers receive these outputs. Some customers are external to the organization, And this is the idea of the traditional end customer. However, most customers are internal, meaning that the outputs of one process often become inputs to other processes in the organization. Generally, the outputs have more value than the inputs. Another way to say that is customers are willing to pay more for the outputs than the individual inputs. Next, events like a customer order trigger a process to begin working. In other words, why does the process need to start? And continuing, tasks are the individual steps of the process. And the text calls tasks the heart of a process. And finally, decisions are points at which workflow can diverge in a process. Ideally, rules, or at least guidelines, help determine decisions. Otherwise, a process will have issues with consistency, which, as we know, can cause problems with quality. The text again notes how all of these components are interrelated, such as outputs of one process become inputs to another process, or decisions impact specific tasks and may also create an event that starts another process. The next topic covers process owners. The process owner is responsible for the performance of a process, and they might be in charge of a process or a function. They might be a manager or supervisor, or perhaps an executive. And they're key to successful process improvement, specifically their support for fixing the process and then later maintaining those fixes is absolutely critical. Likewise, subject matter experts are also key to success. These individuals, who may be the process owners themselves or other key resources, hold specific knowledge that will be critical to understanding and fixing a process. Process owners monitor the performance of a process and understand how the process fits within the organization, and also ensure that sufficient resources are available. And then process owners support control of the process, meaning make sure the process is stable and does not revert back to the previous version. Remember that control is the final step of DMAIC. The next topic in the chapter is data. As the text says, data is inherent to any process. So all processes generate some form of data, or at least they should. For Six Sigma, data will determine how well a process is running, including the impact of the improvements that we'll make. So this includes the measure part of DMAIC, but also hits analyze, improve, and control. As a quick aside, do your processes at work generate data? Well, they should, because how else can you show your performance? That is, without data, your performance is highly subjective, which is generally not good for you. The last concept in this chapter is a SIPOC diagram. SIPOC is an acronym for supplier, input, process, output, and customer. And a SIPOC diagram breaks down the elements of a process to better understand it. As the text states, the SIPOC diagram is one of the most often used tools for understanding process components and process relevance because it's so effective and simple. SIPOC provides a high-level view of the organization or of a specific process. So suppliers provide inputs for a process, which are then transformed by the process to become outputs, which are then delivered to the customer, who can be external or internal to the organization. The SIPOC diagram is typically developed in the define stage of DMAIC, and it can be developed in a single brainstorming session with the help of the process owner and subject matter experts. And again, SIPOC diagrams are scalable, representing a very detailed process or the organization as a whole. To build a SIPOC diagram, first create the swim lanes, meaning one column each for suppliers, inputs, process, outputs, and customers. Second, set boundaries for the process to control for potential scope creep. That is, avert the dreaded, while we're at it, let's also fix this tendency. Third, complete the swim lanes, but we actually do so in a different order. POCIS, process, outputs, customers, inputs, and then suppliers. Though you'll likely return to previous lanes as you brainstorm ideas. And be sure to keep the team high level so as not to dig into details as well as causes and potential solutions. And you can use short phrases for descriptions to help simplify it and maintain that high level view. Finally, validate the information by having subject matter experts rigorously review the SIPOC diagram. And the text suggests using large pieces of paper and/or a large whiteboard to develop the SIPOC diagram, as it's truly a visual and iterative process. The chapter closes with examples of different SIPOC diagrams, such as one at the business level and one for an automated process, as well as one for a process with enablers, such as resources. So closing the chapter, quality experts are process fixers. Fix the process to improve the quality of the outputs.